All right, let me ask you guys a question. What happens between the end of college football season and the national championship?
Christmas.
A lot of shit talking.
Heisman.
So I'm
Trophy.
not only am I on all these texts and chains, we're following. There's a lot of energy news to talk about. We're going to talk about it. But first, I just put my head down. I've got 50 tweets going between two guys. One guy's a Longhorn. Another guy was a varsity player at Kansas. And he was throwing shade at Quinn Ewers, which, Quinn, UT quarterback. But it's hilarious what has gone down is this debate has been brewing over OSU's quarterback who is into the transfer portal. And there's this debate like who's a better quarterback. If you guys don't know, it's Kyle McCord versus Quinn Ewers. It's great. I love when we have nothing else to do and we talk energy and we talk college football, and it's all about guys that sit on couches and we complain and we talk shit about guys that are playing in the real field.
Well, it's kind of
But
crazy.
the biggest sports news of the weekend in this fun period for you is what?
I don't know.
Ohtani signing $700 million contract for the
I saw
Dodgers.
that.
Oh.
Didn't you tweet about this?
No, Ohtani, that's great. No, what I tweeted was because I lost in a playoff to Casey Clemens, but Roger Clemens tweets a video of his son striking Ohtani out with a 49-mile-an-hour fastball. It was hilarious.
They have these alerts, when games get out of hand and position player pitching.
Yeah.
He was a position player pitching, and he rung him up.
49 or 94?
No, 49. I think he just threw it.
It was a slow curveball.
Yeah.
And
okay.
just dotted the outside of the plate, and he got rung up. So it was
pretty funny. All right, a lot of news, boys.
Yeah, we had some big news today. It's funny because we had our PR public announcement of Digital Wildcatters $2.5 million raise, and I had this planned out for a couple of weeks, and then saw the Oxy news, and I was like, God damn it, Oxy's stealing my thunder here. So, Mark, what happened with Oxy?
Well, the long-awaited announcement, I guess, came out. Oxy announced this morning that they were buying CrownRock, a Midland Basin private producer, which is part of the Lime Rock Partners portfolio, for enterprise value of $12 billion. It's $1.2 billion in debt, 10.8 in equity. On top of that, there's going to be, or in the equity component, there's going to be an additional raise of, I think, $1.7 billion of that. And so $9.1 billion of cash plus cash from proceeds from an equity issuance. So, no, let me back up. $9.1 billion in cash, and then there's an equity component of $1.7 billion that makes up the equity, and then $1.2 billion assumption of debt. So it puts it right at $12 billion, which I think is on the more robust or richer side of what was expected. I remember, I don't want to put words in his mouth, I remember Dan Pickering tweeting about when the rumors were out that the talk was somewhere in the $12 to $13 billion range, that they better have a good explanation for that. And so at the very top of the announcement talks about the immediate and significant accretion of free cash flow on the order of 25%, $1 billion in year one. And it looks like the operative price deck is somewhere between 65 and 75. I listened to a bit of the intro to the call this morning, but got sidetracked on.
Yeah, but what about the synergies?
It's always about synergies, bro.
Vicky did say we welcome all qualifying CrownRock employees to the Oxy organization.
I want to give a shout out to Aubrey K, my good friend Aubrey K over on Twitter, because November 29th, Kirk's over here throwing up the horns for you.
So we'll put up the tweet.
We'll put up the tweet, but some journalist had tweeted another scoop hitting Wall Street Journal. Occidental Petroleum is in talks to buy closely held Permian producer CrownRock. That was back on November 29th. And actually, I think Aubrey might have done this before that, but he retweeted it, said the plane don't lie, and was tracking Oxy's plane flying up to Omaha, Nebraska to old Warren Buffett. And so Aubrey always likes to joke that he uses his landman skills hunting people down.
Dude, he did. I mean, he posted that.
Yeah. So shout out to Aubrey.
November 29th.
Kind of crazy, man. You can be getting all this good
oil
M&A.
So CrownRock has been around in the Lime Rock portfolio for, I think, an unconventionally long period of time. 2007 is the genesis of CrownRock. I think Lime Rock has been unique over the course of its ownership, and this is in consultation with our traveling partner, Chuck, who is our resident private equity landscape and relationship expert. But, over the course of time, they've done some very creative things to...
Are we just not recording with Chuck for a month? I just realized that.
No, we're not. I mean, we've kind of said,
like
Chuck...
He could definitely call in if you wanted to, but we're just not doing it.
I mean, let's be honest. I know the rumors are going to hit. We asked Chuck to take a break. We might welcome him back, but right now, Chuck needs to take a break. He went off to Europe.
Hey, real quick. I know you're like on a really important point, but I didn't give Aubrey his full props because he actually posted it November 2nd.
Dude, Aubrey K is he's one of my favorite
a month
guys.
And a half ago, and he said smells like an Oxy acquisition, and it shows plane traveling between Houston, Omaha, and Midland. He posted that a month and a half ago.
We need to get him on the show, bro.
We do.
No pun intended. That's the preferred route if you remember the Anadarko transaction and the big preferred wedge.
You got to kiss the ring in Omaha, right?
So, I think the unique profile and timeline of Lime Rock's ownership of CrownRock and the ability for them over time to do creative things to provide liquidity along the way to their LPs speaks really to the company building aspect of the CrownRock story, which is, I think, increasingly unique in the world of upstream private equity. I mean, think back to 2007. We've been through a couple of times since then. And so, credit to those guys for getting this deal done and a lot of cash.
I mean, I want to unpack this a little bit, but first of all, thank you, David Blackman. I follow him on Substack. He always is writing great stuff, but he posted a letter from Andrew Dittmar, Senior Vice President at Inverse Intelligence, who wrote, because you said earlier, like, you better have some justification when you're paying $50,000 an acre. And quote, this is from the letter, another motivator driving this latest wave of deals from the buyer's perspective is a sense of urgency to secure shares of what is perceived to be the last tranche of the Permian region's highest quality drilling prospects. Quote, EIR calculates there is only about 6 years of the highest quality inventory capable of generating a 10% return at a $45 oil price, left at current drilling rates, and over 70% of it is in the Permian. End quote. With no new shale plays on the horizon and global opportunities shrinking, the Permian also leads in potential for finding new resource as drillers test additional benches of the region's stacked pay. What do you think about that? I mean, that is, to me, the justification for Oxy jumping in. What say you, Mark? You're the man on this.
Yeah, I do think the fear of the music stopping without a chair is part of the dynamic here. And so, this is clearly a scale up in the Midland Basin. How much of that is left in scale with any kind of contiguous nature to the acreage? 1,700 plus development locations, I think. They characterize 1,250 of those as development ready at $60 or below, which kind of made me raise my eyebrow. We're talking about $60 break evens as a threshold. Now, a number of those 750 below, I believe 40 or 45. So you start to break that down. What about the 500 in between that lower bar of break even to $60 WTI? We're having to look at things that and the way Oxy characterizes it, this moves to the upper tier of their portfolio. And so if $60 is coming into the conversation as a break-even threshold, then I think that's different than I think some of the talk that we've heard recently around other deals, because the view is the productivity, the cost efficiency, et cetera, the economics around a high-graded Permian Basin, particularly in the Midland Basin, break-evens are generally accepted to be down certainly much lower than 60 in the 40s and the 30s.
I mean, my dad was born in the Permian. So, I mean, the Permian Basin, Midland has been, and the Permian Basin at all, has been this like hilarious, incredibly most important place in the world, especially for the United States. World War II. But there's also times where Midland's been a piece of shit and no one wanted to be there. Oil prices sucked and everyone's trying to get the hell out of there. What's going to happen over the next few decades in the Midland? Because right now we're saying Midland's the most important dirt in the world right now. You've got, Exxon, you've got Chevron. Everyone's jumping in, not Chevron, but Exxon. Oxy's now jumping in. What do you think over there?
And I've heard from a good source that Endeavor deal is close to
imminent,
getting inked up. There was a conversation on Collide the other day about this. Shad Frazier had wrote a really good post. Shad's over at Endeavor and was talking, what does the future of the industry look like? Because this industry has always, found technological advances that unlock new oil. But, here we are tapping into the source rock, into shale, and really kind of chewing through the best inventory already. Some of the best rock is already in the days behind us. And so what does the future of American oil look like? And I told him I read this book. It's called Wildcatters, and it's sitting in my living room, and it's written pre-shale. And it's talking about how oil independence in the United States are some of the most resilient businesses that have ever existed. Like there's always, throughout history, there's always like, oh, there's going to be a roll up. Everyone's going to get rolled up, but it doesn't happen because there's so many entrepreneurs in the industry that find a little niche to carve out. And it kind of brought me along the lines of thinking as well. It's like, if you look at how much oil we recover, I mean, it blows people's minds to know how much oil we leave in the ground. And I have a hard time believing that this industry will be content with how much oil we've left in the ground. And so start putting a lot of resources and energy into R&D on how we go in and recover that. And so, I think that if you look at Twitter, there's a lot of doom and gloom on peak shale, peak American oil and gas. But also just one thing I know about this industry is that it's resilient as fuck. It's like a bunch of cockroaches. You just can't kill them.
Well, and that analogy is better than at the trough when we coined the terms somewhat uniquely for E&P and their ability to survive and reincarnate in Chapter 22, Chapter 33. Bankruptcies, that you can't kill them is no matter what.
I mean, if you're an idiot and treat some of our audiences, they just don't know, which I'm one of them. I see a couple things. I see oil prices right now around $70 or so. I see this as a number one, almost an all cash deal. So if I'm an independent in the Midland and Permian, am I thinking, shit, dude, I want cash? Number one. Secondly, they're paying $50,000 plus per acre. This is skyrocket. This is not $100 oil prices. This is $70, let's say, but the per acre is huge. What does that say? And what if you're an independent right now, are you thinking, shit, it's time for me to sell? Or do you think it's going to go up?
Paying a premium for near-term cash flow and comes out on a metric that I think is less primary to the acquisition conversation. I think it also speaks to how urgent things have gotten for the buyers that are out there.
But why is it urgent? What is the sense of urgency now?
I'll tell you one thing that I know about this industry is it's a bunch of followers.
That's what I'm saying. Is what is so urgent right now?
It's like, oh, Exxon's making deals. It always comes in.
Someone created urgency. We're all feeling it, but why?
It's just a muscle memory competitive response, right?
it's more of a somewhat. To answer your question, it's more of a psychological driver than it is like an actual physical or economic driver.
I think this is what's driving all of it. Everyone's scared of Nicolas Maduro taking over Guyana, and then he's going to go after Midland. We're worried about global domination.
Did y'all see my tweet that went viral about Venezuela?
Dude, let's move over.
Did y'all see that? So December 7th, I tweeted Venezuela military versus Exxon private contractors. Who you got?
There's a poll.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it did 1,000 likes, 300. Dude, it's the stupidest stuff that.
Dude, I am totally like.
I thought the TAM of that tweet was like 10 people.
You know, it's going to be the private contractors. They've got better equipment.
So there's actually some interesting comments. They're like, if this was Exxon from the 90s, pick Exxon from the 90s, but not the defanged ESG.
Oh, are they kind of weak now?
Exxon, I don't know. I don't put up with I'm not familiar with Exxon security.
Let's not forget that China is in the block as well, in the form of CNOC.
CNOC, they've been there. Yeah, and
have we transitioned to Venezuela? Guyana?
We're going to go, but we can.
We're
bounce.
walking up the run a show backwards.
We can bounce.
That's
what we do here.
We gotta stay fluid in our run a show. That's just more of a suggestion,
dude. Yeah, let's go.
Let's do it.
We're now in Venezuela.
So let's talk about this because I'm not really up to speed on the topic, but I did think that it was funny that Venezuela just published a map saying that
this is ours.
We've annexed Guyana. I was like, is that the way it works? I was like, you just like publish a map and like, this is ours. But I actually looked. So I think someone wrote a Twitter thread about this, but there's actually a lot more history behind this than just, Guyana has oil, we want it. Like there's actually been a lot of back and forth over the course of
Here's
history.
Just a short history. October 18th, the current administration, the Biden administration, they do a deal with Maduro to keep trying to get more oil on the market. And in exchange for that, and this is October 18th, in exchange for that, they're saying like Maduro needs to have like fair elections. So fast forward a few weeks, December 3rd, Maduro claims victory in a national referendum saying that he has overwhelming support. Now, supposedly only 12% of the registered voters turned out. He says over 51% turned out. So he's saying no. Half the country, and not only did half the country show up and voted for him, by the way, he's claiming that 98% of the voters approved the invasion. So the Venezuelans want it. Now, if I'm in Venezuela, maybe I do want it because things suck. Because as we're seeing, and by the way, again, thanks David Blackman for this data, but per capita in Venezuela has dropped from $12,600 or so a person in 2011 to $3,400 in 2023.
I mean, inflation's running. I saw a statistic on World Statistics that Venezuelan inflation tops the world ranking. That's not a ranking you want to be on top of, but I think it's running currently about 311%.
359%.
Okay.
I think it's
changed in the last few days.
I think it's interesting that Venezuela wants to annex part of Guyana now after this big oil discovery. But you look at like what Venezuela has done historically to their oil industry. I mean, you have oil reserves and you just can't economically get them out because
this territory that's been in dispute goes back to the 1800s.
Yeah,
with the French in Guyana, and conveniently, and we'll post a map of the area. Conveniently, the Venezuelan boundary line encompasses that onshore Essequibo territorial region, but also the territorial waters that basically covers all of the Staybrook block, which is massive. And
which I'm like, in the 1800s, they didn't know about the Staybrook block. So
it's producing 400,000+ barrels a day, going quickly next year to 600,000+ barrels a day.
I gotta say,
Exxon says that they can get it to 1 million barrels a day.
Yeah.
Releasing the map just seems like a very 1800s move. Like,
so we had the luxury of speaking with someone who had spent a lot of time both back in the day when things went south in the late 90s with the emergence of Chavez, and basically kicked Exxon out, and then Chevron's left with a lot of uncertainty over its assets and country. and you basically fired all the technical and managerial and operating competency within PDVSA and replaced it with high-ranking military. Now you've seen what's happened over the last 25 years. This all started in 97, 98. I think Chavez attempted a coup in 97, was successful in 98. And then from that point, we've seen nothing but a spiral. This latest easing of sanctions is a bit of a glimmer of hope, but immediately upon the heels of that, as we saw, Maduro's out laying claim to the territory that includes Stabroek, and also behaving very aggressively as regards the long-running dispute over the disputed territory of Skibo. So what's motivating this? It's as you pointed out with some of those statistics on per capita GDP, what's happened with we talked about it a few shows ago, the auction ultimately of Citgo, which will leave Venezuela with nothing because those proceeds will be used to satisfy in part their huge and very debt obligations. Mm-hmm. And certainly Maduro sees this as an opportunity to be aggressive and reach out and grab some cash flow for himself. Mm-hmm. And I think from a populist standpoint, the support for that to help the suffering people of Venezuela is probably something that shouldn't really surprise anyone. And so you're facing a fairly complex set of dynamics too. We mentioned that CNOC's in the block, and I think during the period of the most severe sanctions of Venezuelan export, CNOC has been one stalwart customer, and I think the Chinese would probably step in the middle of this, and if they haven't already, and reminded the Venezuelans and Maduro of that very fact. Chinese have been big buyers of Venezuela.
I know this has the whole
exports
reading of there's big states behind this. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if China wasn't pushing from both sides. Maybe not, but there's so much oil at stake here.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is I was reading, and it seems Brazil is on Guyana's side. So you have United States, Brazil, which I don't understand. I don't know what Brazil's political motivation is for picking either Guyana or Venezuela. But yeah, I imagine that it's not just some simple dispute. I'm sure that there's other players that are.
I mean, Maduro's more friendly to Russia and China and we have had pretty tough sanctions against Venezuela. So in some ways, if Venezuela gets anything in this dispute, it seems like the Russians or the Chinese will come up on top. So it's definitely, and CNOOC has a position there on the Guyana side, but this is interesting to see how this plays out, and it's definitely going to be political.
There's a lot of. Did y'all see Argentina's new president?
Yeah,
election.
He already cut like nine
ministries.
Yeah, he said that
he's on the ball.
Said I saw a quote that essentially he's promising economic shock treatment to the country, and so just a lot of movement down in South America.
I wonder what he's doing. What's going to happen with the contracts down in Argentina's regions?
Yeah, I have no idea. I figured there's got to be some implications for that. It seems like a pretty big deal. So I'm sure that we'll be talking about South America for the near future on this show. Yeah,
love it. Should we go down there and do some inspections?
Dude, absolutely. You know what's funny is, like, back in 2018, this consultant hit me up to help consult on Venezuela, especially around oil and gas technology and Bitcoin mining. And I was like, dog, and he was talking about the new regime coming in. He's like, if this regime wins, they're all American educated, went to Harvard. He's like, it's an opportunity. He's like, I want to figure out how we revitalize the oil and gas industry. And back then I was just like, dude, I'm way over my head here. I'm like, you're talking to the wrong guy. It's like, I don't know anything about helping third world nations revitalize the oil and gas industry. So
we've talked about Midland and the frenzy. We talked about Venezuela, Guyana, which is all over oil.
And the last part of that you mentioned, it's going to be political. I guess our next topic moves squarely into the realm of politics.
Yeah, let's go let's go across the pond to the desert and talk about COP28. What are the remnants, Mark, from COP28? What can we say about it?
Well,
it hasn't already been said.
It kicked off with the IEA declaring that this was a moment of truth for the oil and gas industry and issuing another of in its series of very pointed reports pointing fingers at the oil and gas industry. And then coming into the final week of COP28 was really the meat of the negotiations and trying to get to an agreement whereby there would be a conference of the parties language that would set forth a timeline for the phase down or phase out of fossil fuels explicitly. That didn't make it to the last draft. And so certain of the higher profile and louder voices at COP28 had some words to say about that today. And what was that?
Well, 3 hours ago, I mean, when Al Gore, who is completely motivated self-interestedly to kill fossil fuels, his tweet is the best. Or is it an X? What do you call it now? Is it an X?
Elon's still trying to. The other day when he had that,
just call it a tweet.
When he said "go fuck yourself," he also in that same talk said that if anyone could figure out what to call it other than a post, he would be appreciative.
This is Al Gore's tweet 3 hours ago. COP28 is now on the verge of complete failure. The world desperately needs to phase out fossil fuels as quickly as possible. But this obsequious draft reads as if OPEC dictated it word for word. It is even worse than many had feared. It is, quote, of the petrostates, by the petrostates, and for the petrostates, end quote. It is deeply offensive to all who have taken this process seriously. You mean all those who are profiting from a fear that was started without science? There are 24 hours left to show whose side the world is on. The side that wants to protect humanity's future by kickstarting the orderly phase out of fossil fuels, or the side of the petrostates and the leaders of the oil and gas companies that are fueling the historic climate catastrophe. In order to prevent COP28 from being the most embarrassing and dismal failure in 28 years of international climate negotiations, the final text must include clear language on phasing out fossil fuels. Anything else is a massive step backwards from where the world needs to be to truly address the climate crisis and make sure the 1.5C goal doesn't die in Dubai.
You didn't call it the North Star? That's the new characterization of 1.5.
It doesn't die in Dubai, baby.
Is that the new slogan? You know, I was talking to, I was in Austin and I was hanging out with this neuroscientist, and she's super smart, and she's over in London, and we're talking about just the bias in science now and how there's this kind of dogma around it of you can't actually speak about facts because funding may dry up if you do that. And we were talking more about medical and neuroscience research, but then I started talking about it's like, yeah, you see this in climate as well. Just, data doesn't lie, but humans do. And the way that you cut up data and present data, and it's very easy to, craft narratives. And I think what we've seen over the last 2 years is that the world is coming to terms with reality on what energy policy actually looks like. And so I don't know what actually came out of COP. What was it, 28?
COP 28.
Yeah.
28? Like,
We're going
exactly.
On
it's so fucking irrelevant to anyone that actually works in energy, in my opinion. I just think that people are seeing that that's not actual signal there, and also just having to cope with the realities of the situation.
Well, I can tell
I think
you
what Al Gore's doing right now is he's coping.
According to Bloomberg, I know the planet is really worried about climate right now. because a record 7.5 million people are expected to fly during Christmas, New Year holiday period, which, according to AAA, who began tracking the data in 2000, this will make it the busiest year-end travel season since 2000, since they started tracking.
I saw a video going viral on Twitter yesterday of how they clean snow off the streets in Montreal. And you have
I saw that.
Yeah, you have a front loader with the bucket go, and it scoops all the snow to the side, and then a dump truck comes by with a snow blower and they fill it, and like there's like 6 or 7 trucks involved in this thing. And
sounds like a lot of diesel.
It's a lot of diesel. The good thing is all the CO2 emissions from that diesel are going to thaw out the planet. That way you don't have to scoop snow in the first place. Yeah.
I thought Dan, who tweeted this morning about COP28, Dan Pickering, maybe that was yesterday. COP28, get a bunch of people together, argue strenuously over fossil fuel limits / language to have a quote-unquote successful summit, and then everyone goes back home and ignores what they just agreed to because it isn't practical or economic in the short term. And I replied to that, there is no long term in politics unless your name is Xi or Putin or Maduro. And what we're seeing and bringing Argentina back up,
dictatorships,
and the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, where people have a voice at the ballot box and in part have expressed through a referendum on what they're facing in accelerated energy transition and ill-advised energy policy, is they're going to vote them out. And so the impasse continues. The other thing that I somewhat chuckle at the headlines, which now take pretty liberal license with claiming that this is what the world wants. Well, there's 70,000 people in Dubai. That's not the world. These are the conference attendees. These are the conference leading voices on both sides of the debate. This is not speaking for the world that, as clearly evidenced by some of these election outcomes. And I think 2024 on this issue for the U.S. is going to be very interesting to watch and monitor as well.
It seems like the pendulum swung. Oil is following oil. We talk about COP28. We broke the EV story we did. We were the first to talk about it.
What story?
Just EVs.
There's a glut that sales are slowing down. And then all of a sudden the media weeks, maybe a month later, started covering it. Well, here's some new news. A couple things that are interesting. It's going to get more expensive to buy an EV. So this is just sort of self-fulfilling prophecy here, but the $7,500 discount you get no longer applies starting in next year.
To all EVs?
EVs that have China-made parts or not made in the USA will only be able to get a $3,750 credit.
Oh, dude,
that's a pretty big, substantial.
Big news.
That's big news.
Yeah, because that $7,500 tax credit is super incentivizing for new EV purchases.
Cut in half,
and probably not applicable to a lot of the cars.
So Tesla's Model 3 will be they don't qualify either. So most EVs,
parts not made in China, like that's got to.
China has 90% of the
especially battery parts.
Battery parts, yeah.
That's right.
That's crazy.
And Tesla has 56.5% market share as of Q3 of this year in the U.S.
I don't think I personally agree with that approach, to be honest. If you want to get rid of the subsidy, cool. Understand that. But saying any car that uses parts from China, like, I don't think, why would these... I just don't see how that incentivizes manufacturers to say, oh, we need to get America. Like, they're not going to switch their supply chains, especially around batteries, to the U.S. to capture this.
Well, we don't have. It's going to take years for that infrastructure to
even happen.
Built.
Yeah,
as we've talked about lithium mining. All these things need to years and years and years and years before you're going to be able to do it.
And how far are we going to go in the true supply chain, the value chain? Of producing,
mining,
transporting,
all the way
processing,
the thing,
manufacturing, finishing. assembling? How far are we going to go domestically?
It's a global market. Everything is a global market. I mean, we're dependent on other people's supply chains. I mean, we kind of have to understand that. It's even, when we look at solar and wind and these things, like I've always said, I don't think there is such thing as energy independence. I think that you have to think about energy diversity and security, and just seems like, I don't know. I don't think that the way to limit the subsidy is by cars that have parts made in China. It just doesn't. I don't think it's realistic.
Well, I think
let's see how prescription drug price relief would work if you said, well, it doesn't apply to pharmaceuticals that have any component that's sourced from China.
Yeah.
Which is bigger than you think.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I know I get my fentanyl from China, so it comes from Mexico, but the chemicals are sourced there. I will say this.
On a roll.
Here's an interesting story that came out of the Washington Post. WAPO is insane anyway, so take it with a grain of salt. But they have analysis that shows, and this came out this morning, that 8 fatal accidents, Tesla accidents, were due to the autopilot feature being turned on when it should not have been accessible. Now, they're claiming that this is one of the reasons why EVs aren't being bought, and I don't think any consumer probably thinks about the fatal accidents using autopilot. But this is an interesting story because people are dying because they're trying to use this autopilot feature. It's not completely baked. And one of the reasons why it's being used, like when it's on narrow turns and hills, and I guess software can't see all of that. But what do you think?
Tell me the story again. You said that these are fatal crashes
8
by
fatal
people
accidents.
Using the autonomous driving feature that don't have access to it. Is that what you said?
No. 8 fatal accidents with Teslas that had their autopilot feature turned on when it should not have been accessible. I think that's
what I'm saying. So it should not have been accessible, but does that mean like?
I think I listened to the article. There was actually a news article on it. I think it was more about consumers have the ability to override the system. The manual says you shouldn't do it, but they do it anyway.
It makes more sense because when it shouldn't be accessible, I thought they like jailbroke their car or something.
Well, that's
got access to it, even though they don't have paid access.
Well, this is actually an interesting legal discussion because right now, because technology is moving so quickly, the regulators are following industry, which says, hey, we're telling consumers don't do this. If they do it, it's on them. So it's really the legal liability is falling on the operator, and the operators are choosing to use a feature when maybe it's not the greatest idea.
Yeah.
I can tell you, having used autopilot in my car, I hate it, man. I want the control.
Really?
It does shit that makes me nervous. I'm like, I need control.
And which car?
The Porsche.
And the Porsche? Yeah.
Made me nervous.
I mean, the only autonomous car I rode in was a autonomous lift in Las Vegas. And actually, I enjoyed it. There was one time, though, so they had a driver, and then they had a second driver in the passenger seat. And there's one time a car pulled out, taking a left-hand turn in front of us, and the driver had to hit the brake. And I made some comment. He's like, oh, no, the car would have caught that. And I was like, I don't think so. No. I don't think the car would have caught that. So, but I mean, you talk about like, especially like straight highways in Texas, like I'd let it run.
That's one thing.
Autopilot. For sure.
That's the only time when you're not turning. I mean,
it's just the number of real-time variables.
Yeah.
That you have to adjust
if
to
you're going on
that are unique and not.
Yeah.
I've noticed
not inherently predictable statistically.
My existing car, which has all these auto features, when you're kind of going on a highway that splits, it gets confused. It's like, shit, am I going right or am I going left? I don't know where I'm going. And you kind of like get real nervous.
Yeah.
Because the car will fight you until it figures it out.
It's what feature I hate is assisted driving. Like Toyota has it, Chevy has it. Because you'll be going like 70 down the highway and like you want to like cross lanes or something and it like jerks the wheel back.
I know.
I'm like, what the fuck?
I'm like, you're about to flip,
bro.
Like,
I feel like I'm about to flip the car. So I'd rather have full autonomous than assisted.
So driving. So let's just take all this back. What is the show about today, which is interesting? From the producers to the consumers, oil is taking back the conch. EVs are struggling. COP28 is in some ways a failure, according to the climate, the pure climate folks.
This episode's called Dose of Reality.
You've got Midland going big. There's we don't know if it's irrational exuberance. We don't know what it is, but Midland's pumping more acquisitions, paying premium prices. You've got disputes over oil-rich territories in South America. What's your takeaway? Besides the obvious. And you've got millions of people traveling by air now. Again, they're not worried about emissions. They want to get places.
I would call this episode Dose of Reality. That's what I would name it. That's what Jacob needs to name this episode when it drops.
I would call it the intersection between ideology and reality, bordering on a collision or a collide. And we're starting to see actions related to where people are in their own lives, and what I'm talking about again is how they're voting in energy policy, and getting that right has got to be practical, pragmatic, and considerate of those who don't have it, have the most difficulty accessing it, because their hierarchy of want and need starts with basic standard of living, well-being, surviving, thriving, and then moving up the economic ladder. And right now, the scale, the abundance, the availability, the affordability, and the energy density, we still haven't come up with a wholesale transition solution where we can flip a switch and make that happen in a short period of time, even defined as between now and 2050.
I'm going to end it with this.
That's interesting.
My boy, Aubrey K. This is his latest tweet. I just think he's so funny. CQ Ops guys lining up at Sewell Ford to place F-250 King Ranch orders today.
Aubrey's always good for keeping his finger on the cultural pulse of West Texas.
Dude, his are always have me chuckling, for sure.
Speaking of friends and associates and cultural phenomenon, Chuck just texted, by the way, the Brits love me. There has never been so much awkwardness between the U.S. and Brits since the Delaware. And as I've said before, Chuck has the highest awkwardness threshold of any human being I've ever met. So it's good that he's on the front lines.
Yeah,
that's right.
I think I also very much enjoy awkward interactions too. So, me and Chuck, that's probably what we bond on, is awkward interactions. But all right, is that it for the run of show, or do we have?
That's it.
That's it. I mean, that was a lot of news. I think that,
unless you want to talk about sunflower seeds.
Yeah, so I come in the other day.
Oh shit, dude. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're confronting me on crap, man.
Well, I come in here, like I can't remember. I was already in a bad mood.
It was in this room.
Yeah, I was already in a bad mood for some reason. And I come over here because I had a phone call, and there's a pile of chewed up sunflower seeds on the floor over there. So I would get the vacuum. I come in here and I vacuum them up. And I wasn't even thinking. I was like, oh, this is where Kirk sits. Kirk has sunflower seeds. Then I walk into the war room, and someone had spilled something on the floor from the microwave. So I get on Slack and I'm like, hey, motherfuckers, if you spill something, pick it up. It's not a daycare. And then
talking to you guys too.
Yeah. And then Chuck sends it to y'all's group text. And anyways, I was in a mood, but
I just want to remind you, I sit on that side.
Dude, if I did it, I'm sorry. And if I'm usually great at cleaning because I'm a clean freak. And
you are. So
when you're CEO of a company, there's nothing that you notice more, especially trying to keep like your office clean, for example, and you realize no one else cares.
Yeah.
And you realize most employees think like employees versus you think like an owner.
Yeah.
You don't think like an employee. Yeah. You're an owner. You're like, everything I do.
It's like you want to be proud of everything that you do in your space, but it's all right, dude. I forgive you. I told everyone on the team.
At least he didn't slowly point to his ear.
Y'all both They both gave a heartfelt apology, and I let everyone know since they took the ass chewing on y'all's behalf. But
Mine was more of an alibi.
Yeah, no, you definitely said it wasn't you, but I was like, I can't.
My solo cup made it to my truck.
It's always the person that denies first is the winner, and I was last on that one, so
Dang, Mark just left you out hanging to dry. So, anyways, guys, appreciate y'all being in today for the show. Appreciate everyone listening. If you can, please share the show with a friend. We've been getting a ton of great feedback, ton of great comments. I see people over on LinkedIn saying that they're listening every week. Can't tell you guys how much we appreciate that. It means a lot. And so would appreciate your continued support and sharing the show. We'll catch y'all next week.